Hi everybody, welcome to our live event. My name is Brenda K Anderson and I am a crochet designer and instructor. And today I'm excited to show you guys this project. It is the Crocheted Pretzel Fidget. So this project, my kids are very much into fidgets. We have lots of fidgets at our house and I thought it would be nice to have a way to actually make them out of something that isn't plastic. And crocheting came to mind because of course I'm a crocheter and I absolutely love crochet. So I wanted to show you guys how to make this super easy project, and I was very excited to show you guys today. So if you are a member, then you can go ahead and download the full instructions. So it'll look like this, and go ahead and just follow along, and I will show you from start to finish. This project is super easy. It's even beginner level, I feel like. If you are comfortable holding a crochet hook, then you're good to go. And I'll be kind of giving you some tips on crocheting a small tube, which can be like, that's probably the trickiest part of this whole project. But I don't want to scare you away if you're newer to crocheting. Definitely give this a try. Also, you don't have to invest a lot in the materials. So you're maybe wondering what makes this project a fidget. And I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but there is a marble inside. It's right here right now. There's just a glass marble that's inside this crochet tube, and you can push it all the way around the pretzel. So that's the fidget part of this toy. But if you are not into fidgets, if you don't care for the marble being in there, you could also just make a really cute backpack charm using the same exact pattern and method, and then just use a little bit of fiberfill stuffing as you're working up this project, and then you'll have a very cute little pretzel backpack charm. So, and there's also, I wanted to add this little clasp onto it just so that you can hook it onto your bag or belt loop or kid's backpack, just so that, it's easy to find when you need it. Okay, so for the materials here, we're just using a small amount of a worsted weight, which is a number 4 cotton yarn. So if you are unfamiliar with what worsted weight means, it's the thickness that is like the most prevalent in big box stores in the United States anyway, for things like dishcloth cotton, which is what I'm using here, but also making Afghans, that type of yarn that of course you can make an Afghan with any thickness of yarn, but it's just the most commonly used, I should say, here in the United States. Now this is a number 4, but this is a slightly thinner number 4, a slightly thinner worsted weight yarn. If you are using something that's a little bit thicker, you may want to adjust your hook size to go up just a little bit if you're finding that this is a very tight gauge for you. And actually, I do have notes in the pattern about the gauge and how to modify this project, and I'll be mentioning that as we're working through in case your gauge is not ending up like mine. Just to because getting the correct gauge, it's important because you need to be able to slide the marble through. It needs to be comfortable in your hands, and it needs to have a certain look to it. You don't want to see a bunch of holes between your stitches because it's not going to look great. So I'll be giving you some tips on that as we're working through. But just so you know, this is a 100% cotton yarn, and we need about a little less than 50 yards for one pretzel. So the skein that I'm using, the exact brand, all that stuff is found in your download, and I can actually barely squeak out 4 pretzels out of one of these skeins of yarn. And then the other thing you're going to need is a contrasting color for the salt. So this kind of off-white color is what I'm using, the same exact yarn. It's a number 4, 100% cotton. We're going to be using that for the salt. And just in case you're worried that this is going to be involving a bunch of embroidery, it is not. This is not embroidered. I know that it looks like it is, but I figured out a little clever way of getting the salt in here without embroidering it, and it's to basically maintain all the stretch of the pretzel as you are kind of smushing that marble through. I didn't want to have any strands connecting between the little salt flakes. So this is not an embroidered project, and it's actually a lot more fun, I feel like, to put the salt in this way that I'm going to be showing you as we move through the project. Okay, so you're going to need those 2 kinds of yarn. You're going to need a crochet hook, and I'm using an F hook, which is a 3.75 millimeter hook. And but you will use whatever size hook you need to in order to get the gauge right and in order to get the feel of the fabric the way that you want it to be. So this is a good place to start, but you may find yourself going up a hook size or down a hook size from what I have, or even 2. It just depends on how you crochet. And then, of course, I did talk about these little swivel clasps. This is how the pretzel gets connected to your bag. And I did put a link in there just so you could see up close what this hardware is and where I got it. But basically anything will work just fine to be a clip as long as you have a place that you can stitch through, like either a ring down here or a flat section like this, just because we're going to be doing a little strip of crochet into this to attach it to the back of our pretzel here. So you need some way of attaching it. And then you're going to need some yarn needles or a yarn needle. I actually prefer using a sharp yarn needle for this, or tapestry needle. I'm using a metal one here. Metal seems to work better when you are, at least for me, when I am trying to sew through something that's a little bit of a denser gauge. It helps to have that slippery metal and have something that's not going to be bending like plastic. So I'm actually using a sharper tapestry or yarn needle here. It doesn't have to be sharp. If you don't have a sharp one, that's okay. You can use another one that you already have, but if you do have a metal one, that's going to work a little bit easier. And also, if you're using a needle that isn't very sharp, I would recommend using a slightly smaller one if you have that. Otherwise, just use whatever you have. It's going to be fine. These are just kind of little observations that may seem a little bit picky, but it does kind of help you get your needle through the fabric. Okay. And also, of course, you're going to be needing a marble. So I just listed a regular size marble. These are glass marbles, but it wouldn't have to be glass. It could be plastic if you wanted it to be. It could also, if you already have one of those glass pebbles, but you do have stitch markers, that'll work fine too. All right, so that's it for materials. Let me know. Oh, we've got a hello from Belleville, Illinois. Hi, welcome. Thanks for saying hi there. If you guys have any questions about what I'm doing, or if what I'm doing isn't clear, definitely let me know, and then I'll be able to see your questions here in the chat, and I'll be able to answer them for you during this live event. So, all right. So let's get started. We are going to start by working in the round. So this will be very similar to making an amigurumi. So I like to begin with an adjustable loop. So the way I like to teach that, and you can start with however you want, like however you normally make an adjustable loop is completely fine. But for me, I just draw a little loop like this, and then I take that loop and flip it over onto the strand that's connected to the ball. So I'm just going to flip that over, and I'm going to place my hook underneath that strand, just like that. Then I'm going to rest my finger where everything crosses over, and I'm going to make a chain. So that anchors my loop in place. Then you can tighten your loop a little bit to make it a little easier to work into. And the last thing I like to do is I like to just flip my loop a half of a rotation. So I flip it over like this, so that way I'm crocheting over 2 strands of yarn right here, right when I begin. So like I said, if you have a different way of making your adjustable loop, you can absolutely do it that way. So start with your adjustable loop, and then we're going to work 6 single crochets into our loop. So we're going to insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. We're going to do 5 more. So insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. And here's the 3rd stitch, 4th stitch, 5th stitch, and 6th stitch. Now we're going to pull on that beginning yarn tail and tighten that up. And I like to just leave that hanging on the back for now, and we're going to weave that in a little bit because I never really trust those adjustable loops to stay closed. So especially for something like this where we're pushing a marble on through, or it's going to get a lot of wear and tear, I especially want to make sure that I weave that in pretty well to the back of my fabric. But I'm going to wait until I do one more round first. So that was round 1. And round 2, we are going, and we don't join at the end of the round. You probably noticed that. I just finished with my last single crochet and tightened it up. We're not going to join, but instead we're going to work into the very first single crochet we made, and we're going to do 2 single crochets in that stitch. So there's the first stitch and the second stitch. And if you want to keep track of where you started, you don't really need to on this project, but maybe just for this first round, if you're a little newer to crochet, you can throw a stitch marker in that very first stitch you did, just so you can keep track of your stitches. And then we're going to do 1 single crochet in the next stitch. And then we're going to repeat that. So 2 single crochets in the next stitch, 1 and 2, and 1 single crochet in the next stitch, 2 single crochets in the next stitch, 1 and 2, and 1 single crochet in the next stitch. So at this point you should have 9 stitches. You can count them up, count those V's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the one that's marked is 9. So now at this point I like to weave in my end, so I'm going to just turn my work over so the right side is touching the table, and I'm going to go ahead and weave in that yarn tail into the fabric just so that it can't open up later. So I like to just weave that back and forth in a couple of directions. And this is where having that sharp yarn needle really comes in handy, because you can pierce through, instead of going between your strands of yarn, you can split and go right through a strand of yarn. And that just creates a little bit more friction, and it's much less likely that your yarn is ever going to come out of there. It's not going to undo. So I'm going to just go ahead and cut that off. And now we can continue. So we're going to just start working in a tube shape. So that means we're not doing any more increases. We're just going to work around and around and around. And at this point, it really doesn't matter if you have that stitch marker in there, because you don't need to know exactly where the beginning of the round is anymore. You don't have to finish this project with completed rounds. You can just go around and around and around until it's the right length. And then once we do one more round here, we're going to start making our salt pieces. We have to do a little bit of prep work for those, and then we're going to start adding those to our piece. So I like to wait until at least the second round or third, like the next round after the increases, to start putting the salt in. So I just put 1 stitch in each stitch around here. I'm going to stop right there, and then we're going to prep our pieces of salt. Okay, so in order to make the salt, you're just going to cut your pieces at about somewhere between 12 or 14 inches or something. You can eyeball this if you want, or maybe just cut 1 strand to that length, and then cut a second strand to the same length, and then we're going to test one out and make sure that it's the right length for you, because everybody makes things a little bit differently, and I just want to make sure you don't cut all of your strands and then wish you would cut them all a little longer or a little shorter. Okay, so we've got the length that this is, so we know how that's going to be after we make this piece of salt. So in order to prep 1 piece of salt, we're just going to fold our yarn strand in half like this, and then we're going to fold it in half again. So I'm going to take that loop and bring it down here. So now we have basically four strands of yarn. There's the loop, there's the 2 ends. Then I'm going to grab this at the very top, and then we're going to tie an overhand knot. So just grabbing that loop, and I'm going to tuck that through here and pull on it just gently. We don't want to pull on it too hard so that we can adjust this. So what we're looking for is, I'm going to just remove my hook here. What we want is this loop to be about the right size that we can get our crochet hook through, but not too much larger. We don't want it to be tight. We just want it to be, a good size for our crochet hook. And we do want that big knot to be right there. We don't want to have, don't work too hard to try and get that knot to be really tiny, but we do want it to be tight enough that that knot is not going to just undo. So I'm going to pull on this just a little bit. That feels pretty tight. That knot doesn't feel like it's going to slip. And this is a nice size to get your hook through very easily. It can fit in there, but it's not super big and sloppy, right? You can move it back and forth on your hook, but it's not, you'll see in a minute why why I'm spending this time telling you about what that hook size is supposed to be like. Should just comfortably fit on your hook. And then what I like to do is just leave it on my hook, and then I'm going to trim this away. And I like to trim at an angle like this, because then all of the yarn tails are at slightly different, they end at a slightly different place. They don't all end together at the same point. And then that's how we prep 1 piece of salt. Okay, so you're gonna need probably somewhere around 20 to 25 or maybe possibly even 30 if you like a saltier pretzel, pieces of salt. And you can prep them all at once and put them in a little jar, or you can, prep them as you go. When you need a piece of salt, you can make one, however you like to work. I prepped all of mine ahead of time, but I am going to show you how to make that salt just one more time for a little bit of review. So basically you fold it, then you fold it, then you're going to take the end that has the two folds, and that's where your loops are going to be, and you're going to do just an overhand knot. Just tuck those loops in through here. Oops, one of them got caught somewhere. Let me back that up. Sometimes it helps actually to straighten these out if you have a hook there, and you can make them the same length. All right, so I'm going to do an overhand knot. There they are. Pull them through. I'm going to place my hook in here just to make sure it's a good size and tighten that knot. So it's good to have a bulky knot here, but you also don't want your knot to slide. And then you're going to trim it. And I usually trim it somewhere around like at least 1/4 of an inch away from the knot, if not a little bit more, and trim at an angle like that. Okay, so they end at different places. Okay, so that's how you're going to prep your salt. And once you are ready to add a piece of salt, you are just going to place it on your hook like this. And what you want is the knot to be on the inside, as well as those little cut ends. That's going to be on the inside of your pretzel. So it's just going to hang like this. And you want this strand of yarn to cross over the top of your piece of salt and trap the knot in place. Here, Okay, so you can see how this strand is going across in front of where that knot is. It's holding the knot on the inside of the pretzel. Okay, so we're going to place the salt on. We're going to insert our hook into the next stitch. We're going to make sure that that strand of yarn is trapping the knot. And we're going to grab that yarn and pull the yarn fairly tight here. Because what you want is this little strand right here to be pulled fairly tight so that knot can't pop through. Okay, so now you have this. You're going to complete a single crochet. I know it doesn't look like a single crochet because that white is in the way, but otherwise if the white was not there, it would be a regular single crochet. So we're just going to yarn over and pull through everything, and that's going to secure that little piece of salt in place. Okay, I'll show you that a few more times as we work, so don't worry if that was a little confusing or you didn't quite understand what was happening there. All right, so now we're going to just work some more single crochets all the rest of the way around. So one single crochet into each stitch. And then I'm going to do another round because I don't generally put a piece of salt right next to another piece of salt. I mean, it really looks the best if your salt can look sort of random. You don't have to place it in there's no placement instructions in the pattern because I didn't think that was very important. I felt like you could just kind of eyeball where you put your salt. I would say, place your salt, work around, another round after that, and then take a look and think about where you'd like your next piece of salt to be. I'm going to do one more round before adding my next piece of salt. So I'm just working one single crochet into each stitch around. And if you've never made something this small before, that is really probably the trickiest part of this whole project, is crocheting something that's pretty small. I like to hold this piece and this will depend on how you hold your yarn as well, but I like to place a finger inside of the piece that I'm crocheting just so that I can make sure I'm not accidentally pushing through both layers, and it makes it a little bit easier for me to hang on to. So the tip of my middle finger here is just sitting right in the top of that opening as I work. But you know, there's no wrong way to do it. You just have to figure out what's comfortable for you. Okay, I'm going to add another piece of salt right here. So I'm going to place that on my hook. and make sure that I put the ends to the inside of the pretzel. Then I'm going to place my hook in the next stitch. And as I bring my yarn across to my yarn over, I want to trap that knot that's in the white colored yarn right there. So I'm going to just do my yarn over, bring up a loop, yarn over, and then pull through everything. So that's going to trap that little piece of salt in place. And then I like to just poke that down into the pretzel so it's out of my way. And I'm going to continue making my single crochet stitches around. I'll do a couple of rounds. We'll add another piece of salt. And so the goal here is you're going to randomly, you want your salt to look pretty random when you're putting it on. Some can be closer to each other, some can be farther apart. So, you know, calculating it and figuring out every so rounds and place your salt, that's just going to make it look more regular, which I feel like looks less like a real pretzel. Let me just pull this in here. And the other thing is you don't need any salt on the back of your pretzel, because normally pretzels don't have salt on the back side of the pretzel. You just put the pretzel on the sheet to bake and sprinkle it with salt, and then it just gets baked on the one side. So here we have the salt that's kind of randomly placed. This is what we're making, but the salt is just sort of randomly placed along that, and it's only on one side. Okay, so as you're working around, you can keep kind of flattening your piece and looking to make sure that you're putting the salt just on that one side of the pretzel. You don't want to put it on both. I mean, you can if you want, but then that's a lot more work, because then you have to make a whole bunch more pieces of salt. And I feel like it looks really good to have just the salt on the front side. All right, I'm going to do another round here. And then we'll place another piece of salt. Okay, so here we're getting around to the front side, so I'll just kind of flatten that down and look at it, and I'll probably just put another little piece of salt right over here. So I'll do a stitch here, and then the next one I'll place my piece of salt. So I'm just going to put my hook through the loops, bring the tail to the wrong side, right? So it's on the inside of the pretzel. Place my hook into the next stitch, and then when I do my yarn over, I want to yarn over pretty tightly so that this yarn over is going to hold that knot on the inside. The salt can't come off, you know, but if you didn't do that very tightly, I think that your salt could spin around and the cut tails could poke out of your pretzel. I mean, that's not such a horrible thing. You can just go back in there and probably push your crochet hook through and pull them back to the inside. But just anchoring them, taking the time to anchor them in place, you know, with that yarn over being pretty tight to keep the knot on the inside, you're gonna thank yourself for that later when you don't have to deal with any little fringy pieces sticking out of your pretzel. All right, so I'm going to do another round or two, and then we're going to talk a little bit about checking your gauge to see how it's going. Now, you know, as you're working on your pretzel, you may have already noticed by this point if it's really hard to work into, you may want to go up a hook size, like if it's just really hurting your hands because it seems too tight, or if you're seeing a lot of stitches, a lot of holes between your stitches, then that's going to be a little loose. You do want this to be a fairly firm gauge. You don't want to see holes between your stitches, especially because when you push that marble through, you are going to see a little bit. Here, let me just grab this here. You can see it stretches it out a little bit here. See how you can see? I think this is a white marble inside this one. You can see it just a little bit through those holes. But if the holes were even bigger, you would see even more. And it just wouldn't, I feel like it wouldn't be very sturdy over time, and it probably won't keep its shape very well. There's no stuffing in here at all. It's just the crocheted tube, you know, with all the little fringy bits, which actually kind of serve to stuff it just a tiny bit. But you know, if you're crocheting at a looser gauge than this, it's just not going to keep its shape as well. It's not going to look quite as nice. All right, so I'm gonna go around one more time, and then we're gonna check to see what the fit is like. All right, so if you've got holes between your stitches, you're gonna wanna start over and use a smaller hook. If it's really, really tight and it's hurting your hand to work into it, or you feel like it's just too frustrating, you should go up a hook size and see if that helps. But you should be fairly happy with the fabric that it's making before you even check with the marble how that's going to work. All right, so the next thing to check is to see how the marble is going to fit in your piece. I think, as far as I know, most marbles are about the same size, but you know, there may be some marbles that are slightly larger, so I want to make sure you know what to do in case the marble isn't fitting very well in your project. All right, so once you get a couple of inches, you know, it helps if you have enough where you can kind of play with it, like 2-3 inches. You can place the marble inside your piece and make sure that you can move it up and down by pinching on the fabric. You can slide it back and forth in there. And if you feel, and this feels fine to me, but I already kind of knew what my gauge was going to be like because I've already made a couple of these pretzels. If you feel like it's way too tight and you can barely move that marble and it's not going to be fun, I mean, because you want your fidget to be satisfying and fun. You don't want to have to feel like it's work, right? And it should not feel like work. Then you may think about either going up a hook size, or back in that third round when we first started just like working around one stitch per stitch and we weren't increasing anymore in round 3, you could just add an extra single crochet into any one of those stitches, or 2 single crochets if you feel like you need it. Okay, so I would do that back in round 3. So round 1, that's when we first made our adjustable loop. We put our 6 single crochets in. Round 2 was when we did those increases where we did 2 single crochets in one stitch, 1 single crochet in the next, and then we repeated that around. So then the next round, round 3, that's where I would make the adjustments of making this piece bigger. You could add 3 more increases if you wanted to. You want it to be snug enough that the marble isn't just going to be like falling through the pretzel. You should have to kind of push on it a little bit to get it to go through, because that's a little more fun. But you know, you can make it to whatever size you need it to be. If you feel like it's too big, like if your yarn is thicker than mine, or if you're crocheting looser but you don't mind the gauge and the gauge looks fine, then you could do 1 less or 2 fewer increases on that round number 2. You could just increase 1 time. So an increase is just when you put 2 single crochets into 1 stitch, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So those would be ways that you can adjust your piece in order to fit your marble, or change it if you have, you know, a different thickness of yarn. All right, so you're just going to continue going on, single crocheting around and placing that salt, you know, randomly as you go. And at about when your piece measures about 8 inches long, I would count up the salt, and then you'll know you're about halfway done, so then you'll know how much more salt you're going to need. If you need to prep more, or if you just want to keep going till you run out of salt, however you want to manage that. But your piece should look like, should measure about 16 inches long here. Unless you made your piece wider, then you might need to play around with that and may need to go a little bit longer. But you know, if your piece is about, you know, 1 inch wide or so, then you can keep crocheting until it's 16 inches long, or somewhere close to that. And then we're going to do 1 round of decreases. And by the way, I do have a marble in here. I just keep the marble in as I'm crocheting it, and then I can check it if anything seems to be getting like tight or anything like that. So I do have a marble in here already. So now I'm going to do that decrease round. So in order to do that, we're going to do a single crochet 2 together. So you do that by inserting your hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, inserting your hook into the following stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop. Now you have 3 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and pull through all 3. And then we're going to do 1 single crochet into the next stitch, which is right here. And then we're going to do a single crochet 2 together over the next 2 stitches. So insert, yarn over, pull up a loop. Insert in the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop. There should be 3 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through 3. Single crochet in the next stitch. Single crochet 2 together. And single crochet in the next stitch. Okay, and when you've finished your round, you can go ahead and cut your yarn. I would leave a nice long yarn tail because we're going to use this for sewing. Maybe that's a little too long, we'll find out. And then you can just go ahead and pull that through to fasten it off. And then we're going to use our yarn needle to close up this end of our pretzel. Okay, so I'm going to be slipping my yarn needle through each of the remaining stitches. I'm just going through the front loop. And it's actually beneficial to have a non-sharp needle here, so you can actually just push it right through that stitch and not get caught, not split the stitch. But you can certainly use a sharp needle if you like. Or if that's what you have. Okay, and then we're just going to pull that until it closes up at the top. We're just closing that in. And then we're going to go ahead and weave that back and forth a little bit so that this is not going to open up. We just want to make sure that this all stays closed. All right, and now we're going to form our pretzel. Okay, so to do that, you're going to make your pretzel kind of cross over itself. Here, we'll place it like a U shape on the table. And then we're going to bring our pretzel arms right on top. Okay, so to show you that again, we're just bringing one over here, and then we're going to twist right here in the middle. So we're just going to flip-flop where we had them placed. So we get that little twist in the middle, and it looks like a bit of a mess here right now, but that's okay. We're just gonna kind of, this is the part where you just need to finesse it a little bit into place. And you wanna try and keep all those little salt pieces facing upward. Don't worry too much because we are going to steam this later, and that's gonna help us get the shape that we really want it to be in. And then you can use stitch markers like this. You can just hook your, catch both fabrics and close it up. Okay, so you can do that. Or if you have quilter's pins, you can go ahead and pin those together. And when you're pinning something like an amigurumi or crocheted pieces together, it's like you're sewing with the pin. You're gonna go through this layer and then through that layer and then back through this layer here. So let me show you right there. Okay, so back and forth to kind of catch it. That's what's going to make it stay in place. You know, if you are newer to pinning things and you think, okay, I just will poke my pin in like that and that'll keep it, it might sort of keep it, but it might also it can very easily move around and shift. But if you're kind of going back and forth, weaving it between pieces, then it's going to stay much more securely in place as you're sewing. Okay, so now we are going to be sewing the surfaces together. And one thing that I found to be very helpful was that we actually have a marble in here already. So I'm going to push that marble over to this section because I'm going to be sewing. First, I'm going to start by sewing this little piece, the back of this, to the top of this. So the two surfaces that are touching, I'm going to kind of squish that marble right over here. And now the marble is right here. So that way we know if we're stitching from this piece into this piece, we know we're not going to accidentally catch some of the fabric here and close up that tube. Because that's the risk that we're running when you're sewing pieces together like this. You don't want to accidentally close the tube because then you won't be able to push the marble around through everything. Okay, so my yarn tail came out up here, so I'm going to just kind of weave it on through to the bottom and over to where the two sections are touching each other. Okay, so now we have this surface, and so the bottom, let me just move this so you guys can see better. The bottom of this tube is going to be stitched to the top of this tube, okay, where they're making contact. So right in between here. So I'm going to go in here, and I wonder if you can hear this. Do you hear that's where the marble is in there. So I know my needle is not, it's hitting the marble and it's not going to be able to go through and catch strands from the back side of that tube. So I'm just grabbing a little bit of the bottom surface. Now I'm going back up to the top. So the top meaning this little section of the pretzel, and going back down and getting a couple strands from the bottom and going up to the top. I'm going to remove this pin. And so we stitch right over here, but this could be flopping around. So we are really going to be stitching all the way around this part. So we're going to grab a little bit of this. Okay, so that surface right there. Come back down here, grab a little bit of that. Grab a little bit of the top, and I don't have a marble in this section right here. You could move it all the way around to there, but you just have to make sure you're only grabbing a couple strands here of the top so you don't close that up. All right, now I'm going to bring my needle through the pretzel so that we can stitch this edge here. Top layer, bottom layer, top layer, and bottom layer. All right, and now we're back where we started. So now we want to travel up and stitch this section here. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to just weave my yarn needle through this edge here. And I'm just being careful. I'm only going through the thickness of those stitches. I'm not stitching it to, I'm not stitching multiple layers together. I'm just sliding it through that fabric. And I kind of want to put, I think I'm going to put another stitch marker or pin right here to keep it crossed over at the place I like, to kind of keep this twist from kind of spreading out and moving up. That's going to keep it held flat, basically. Okay, so now we're going to be sewing this section here. So this layer, see how I can put my finger under there? I don't want to be able to do that. I'm going to be stitching back and forth between these two layers. So grab a little bit of this layer, grab a little bit of that layer. A little bit of this layer, a little bit of that layer. Okay, and I'm just bringing my needle through. It's not being stitched into anything. I just want my needle on the other side. And then I'm stitching these two layers together. Basically everywhere where the two surfaces are touching each other, you want to stitch around that section. We'll bring the needle to the front. Now I'm going to stitch between these two layers here. Okay, and then we would do the same thing right here. So just continuing to stitch all those surfaces that are touching each other, because this strand is sitting on top of the strand back here. Where they touch, we want to be stitching those two layers together. Just grabbing a couple strands from each side. like that. Bring my needle to the back side here. And then I'm going to stitch across here, those two layers together. Oh, and I'm going to move my marble right up to here, just so I know I'm not stitching through, so you can hear it. Let's see. There's a little glass marble in there. That's going to keep me from stitching that tube closed. All right. So once you get that twist stitched in place, and we will have to go back in, actually I'll show you how to add another strand of yarn, just in case you are unfamiliar with that. I do have to go back through and stitch that other little section closed. I'm just weaving my yarn back and forth here so I can fasten that off. But here, right where I have that green stitch marker, I need to actually stitch that down as well. And I usually like to start by just running my needle through the thickness of a few stitches here in one direction. Then I'm going to run them in the opposite direction. This is I'm just showing you how to add a new strand of yarn for sewing. Because tying a knot and just starting to sew, like if you were to sew some, piece of fabric, it doesn't always look the best to have the knot on the outside, and it sometimes will slip through, unless you split one of the pieces of yarn, it can just slip out, it's not going to really hold it steady. So you just kind of sew back and forth in a few directions until it really feels sturdy, and then you can go ahead and start stitching this section here. So this little bit at the bottom of the pretzel just needs to be stitched. And we are almost done with this project. Next thing I'm going to do is show you how to do a little bit of steaming to make it look a little nicer. So I'll finish that up later. I've got another sample where I've already stitched this all closed. But you would just stitch through here, across there, and over to this side. Basically, you just want all the, the surface of the bottom of this touching, where the bottom of this, where that's touching the top of this, you just want those to be stuck together. Okay? So once you finish that, you can weave in your ends, and then you'll have a pretzel that looks like this, which actually looks pretty good, but it is a little bit, there's some areas that it has kind of strange little folds and corners because it's a tube and it was straight before and we curved it. But I just wanted to show you how you can just steam this out so that it becomes a little bit more rounded. So you just can use an iron set at a high heat setting with at a high steam setting as well. You don't want to actually touch it to your fabric, you just want to hover it above. And then that'll kind of relax those fibers and you can curve them into the shape that you really want it to be in. So we don't necessarily want our pretzel to be flattened. I mean, you may, if you like those kind of flat pretzels, possibly. But what we're doing is we're trying to create this curve, and this curve especially, get it to look a little bit rounder and not have those folds in it. And once you give it that steam, then you're able to kind of move things around as you want, and it'll stay once it cools off. Okay? So it'll look very cute. And then the last thing is we're going to attach this clip onto the back of our pretzel. So I am gonna, let's see, here we go. We'll use this little section of yarn. So to start that out, we're going to just put a slip knot on our hook. So I like to leave a little bit of a yarn tail so I know I'll have enough to weave in later. So I'm going to just place that slip knot on our hook. Oh, we have a question. Hi, can you make a gift for my parents' anniversary? Please, tutorial. Ooh. Okay, so tell me, maybe you can, I'll think about that. Parents' anniversary. Do you have any specific suggestions? If you do, you can put it in the chat. But I will think about that. That's actually a really good idea. I've never done a tutorial on something like that before. Thanks for the suggestion. But if you have a specific thought, I actually have some thoughts, but if you have specific ideas, you can throw them in the chat too. Okay, so we're going to start with a slip knot on our crochet hook. I'm going to turn this around upside down. So if you don't have the same kind of fastening piece, like if some of these are just like a round circle, don't worry about it, but you just want to have the hook facing down, and we're going to just insert our hook into the loop and then grab that yarn, pull up a loop, then we're going to yarn over and we're going to pull through both strands. So basically we're making a single crochet, and instead of working it into a stitch like we normally do, we're working it into this big loop. Okay, so we'll do that again. Insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pulley is kind of tight. It can be a little bit slipping around a little bit on you, but I'm holding a bit of tension here. Yarn over and pull through 2. Okay, so you're just going to do however many single crochets you need to in order to fill this up. Or if you have a ring type shape, you could just fill up kind of the bottom section of the ring. I'll add one more in there, or maybe 2. I always feel like it's better to have those stitches really crammed in there tightly instead of spread out, because then they don't slide all over the place. It just gives it a little bit more stability. Okay, so that seems good. I'm gonna fasten this off with a little bit of a yarn tail because we're gonna use this for sewing it onto our pretzel. We're gonna pull that through. And I'm going to just flip my pretzel over, and I'm gonna be stitching it across here. So if you have stitch markers or you have quilters pins handy, you can go ahead and pin this in place if you want. I usually just hold it in place as I stitch, but I'm very used to, handling these types of things. Sewing pieces together. I make a lot of amigurumi, so this is something that comes a little easier for me, but I would recommend, especially if you haven't sewn a lot of little pieces together, use a stitch marker or use a quilter's pin. You can kind of weave your quilter's pin in and out through both surfaces to just kind of anchor that in place. And that way we can, I need my needle from over here. There we go. That can hold that in place for you while you do a little whip stitch. All right, so I'm going to remove this here because I think you'll be able to see a little bit better what I'm doing. But I'm gonna go in and grab a couple strands of the fabric from the pretzel, like that. And then I'm gonna come up through the thickness of that. What I'm trying to aim for is down here by those, those are like the tops of the single crochets. We're looking at it upside down right now. So we're going to come out right there, and I'm going to do a whip stitch around where all of these single crochets are, like into the top of each stitch. And when you do this, if you really want to be able to push your marble through all those twists, you need to be careful that you're not stitching the tube closed. So I'm going to move this underneath here like this. You can put your marble in there so you know you're not stitching that tube closed. But also another thought, another thing is there is plenty of space to just push your marble around here and then push your marble back. It is a little trickier to get your marble through all these twists and things because of the thickness there. So that might not be, depending on how you want your fidget to be, it's just something to think about whether you'd want to be really careful not to stitch this tube closed, or if you just don't care because your marble's only going to be going in this direction, just through here, instead of all the way through the twist to the bottom and all the way back out through the twist. So it's just something to think about. I felt like it wasn't as fun to push the marble through that twist because it was a little bit, there's just a lot going on there and you have to push it a little harder, so it just didn't seem it wasn't as much mindless fun to push it all the way through the twist. But maybe for some of you guys, you might enjoy doing that. So in that case, you want to make sure you put your marble up in here so that you're not stitching your tube closed by accident. Okay, and then if you feel like this is too floppy, you can stitch. I just wanted to show you this. I don't normally do this, but if these were done a little bit looser, or if your clasp is kind of heavy, you may want to go ahead and stitch all the way around that clasp like this to kind of hold that a little tighter to your fabric up here. This is, like I said, I don't normally do this because I feel like it's an extra step and for me it's unnecessary, but I just wanted to give you this option in case you felt like the clasp was pulling away from your fabric because it was only stitched down here and not stitched up here. So you can go ahead and whip stitch around that as well. And you might be wondering, hey Brenda, why didn't we just whip stitch the clasp in place on the pretzel? Why did we have to crochet in it first? And you could do that. I just find that it's really hard to make it look really perfect and nice and filled in here if you're just doing the whip stitches, and it's a lot faster to do that crochet section first and then stitch that down. I just really want it to look, kind of professional and polished looking. I always like looking for ways, little tricks you can do to make things look, a little bit more polished without extra effort. All right, so now I'm just weaving in my yarn tails here. Oops. And I will get that second one woven in. There we go. I just know this is going to get a lot of wear and tear, so I like to go back and forth in a couple of directions here. All right. So that's our finished fidget. So now I can push this marble all the way through. Sorry, you guys can't reach through your screen and feel this, but but maybe you can see the marble. It's right here, kind of pushing it through. And it's nice because some fidgets are loud, and I know that people particularly like those kinds of sounds, but sometimes you're somewhere and you don't want to make a lot of noise, but you need something to fidget with. So this is a really nice option. That, and you can, it'll be durable. It's made out of cotton, and you can clip it onto things. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this project. I hope that you make one for yourself or for someone else who enjoys to use fidgets, or you can make a cute little stuffy bag charm instead if you don't want the marble in there. But I thank you guys so much for joining me here. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you soon in another live event. Bye everyone.